Clayton gets here, joined by, this gorgeous thing right here. My beautiful bride, Stephanie, who is on day 10 with me of the carnivore diet, and she is shredded and has all kinds of energy. And we might get into that later, but lots of good things happen in the Gitz house. But this is another episode of Proximity Podcast, and we are joined by, man, I haven't even read Elaine's bio, and I'm already impressed with what she shared with us so far. So Elaine Stageberg is with us today, and super excited. Elaine, thank you for spending some time. I know you're a busy, mama, wife, business owner, MD, like all the things going on. So I appreciate you carving out some time to spend with us this morning.
And
absolutely happy to be here.
She makes us feel like we have accomplished nothing. reading
no,
but that's the point of this podcast.
Right, we
want to be around people that are where we want to be. So yeah, cool.
Exactly.
So who is Elaine?
So I'm going to read her bio real quick, and then I'm going to let her take the stage and kind of lay out how she got to where she is today. So Elaine Stageberg is an MD. MHA is a psychiatrist, mother of 4, and owner of Black Swan Real Estate. She owns and manages a portfolio of over $300 million in assets under management. Through real estate investing, she has reached financial freedom in her 30s and now helps others to do the same. Black Swan has delivered exceptional returns to hundreds of passive investors through their unique investor-focused private equity funds, which enjoy no sponsor fees whatsoever, 100% return of capital to investors before any splits, and long-term returns and tax advantages, all coupled with socially conscious investing and at least 5% of profits donated to charity. I love that. And you can connect with her, and we'll put all the links in the bio at meetblackswan.com. And I have a bunch of other links that we can get you connected with her. If you're watching this and you want to be a part of what they're doing, we'll put all of that in the links in the bio. So To start, Elaine, I'd love for you to lay out, obviously you've had huge success. We've interviewed many people over the years and had conversations with very successful people, and there always tends to be a theme. First of all, it's never easy to get there. So I'd love for people to hear, what was your journey like from, did you grow up in a rich family? Was it middle class? Was it what was that like for you? And just kind of lay it out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So both my husband and I came from pretty extreme financial scarcity growing up. Unfortunately, my father had substance use problems, eventually died from a drug overdose when I was in my early 20s. I was legally emancipated when I was 16 because I just had some sense that I just couldn't, launch healthfully into adulthood, staying in that situation. And then my husband's mom, she had a brain aneurysm when he was 6 years old, and she was a single mom. And so she had to learn to walk and talk again, and held some employment throughout his childhood, but really not much. And so when he and I met very early on in our relationship, we knew that we wanted to completely change the financial trajectory of our own lives and then the lives of our children. And so we started asking people who were a generation ahead of us, because we couldn't really go to our families to ask about financial wellness because they had really struggled. We knew some examples of what we didn't want to do, but we didn't have any examples of what we wanted to do. And so early on, even before we were married, we had a very common financial philosophy of what we wanted for ourselves. And so we started asking our friends' parents or coworkers who were older than us, what are you doing in your financial life? And we heard time and time again that people were investing in real estate. And it was kind of this side whisper, hey, it looks like I make all of my money as an attorney, but really I'm putting it into real estate, or it looks like I'm making money in, this business that I own, but really I'm taking the profits and, buying these single family homes. And we heard that theme over and over and over. So we decided that we would be real estate investors. We were very fortunate. We were both so fiscally conservative and, just future focused that even before we were married, we both owned our own homes. Wow. We kept my home, converted it into a rental, moved into his home. And that was the start of the journey. And then from there, we purposefully bought real estate that we never lived in, that we operated as investment properties. And I'm sure we'll talk more and more about how that journey unfolded, the key parts of where there were pivotal moments in that growth trajectory. But that's how it all started. And kind of the lesson that I think is all of us have pain in our lives. That's just part of being human. And when we can take that pain and find meaning, and most importantly, find leverage of how we can improve our lives as a result of that pain, that's really where a lot of growth comes from. So if there's something you have in your past that's painful, or something that you're working through right now that's painful, maybe think about a way that you can tell yourself an empowering story around it, how you can use it for your greater good, for the good of your future selves. I don't know if Nick and I would be so financially successful and such a good steward of other people's money if we hadn't seen such extreme financial security growing up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how did you so it sounds like to me you got to this place coming from, extreme sets of poverty for different reasons, you and your husband. How did you just like naturally come by that mindset? Was that kind of in you, or did you have a mentor or advisor that was sort of, obviously you did. I know that came at some point, but when you were younger, did you have somebody that kind of took you under their wing and kind of helped you to develop that?
Not really. When I think about, say, those first 5 years living on my own from 16 to 21, I was really just kind of figuring these things out myself. I knew the pain of not having enough money. I knew the pain of spending money on things that you shouldn't spend money on. And unfortunately, I had such an extreme example of that. There are times when maybe it's a little fuzzy, let's say, a clothing budget, for example, when does it cross the line into frivolous versus a necessity? Well, when drugs are involved, it's clear that that's not a necessity. And so I saw time and time again that the money that our family did have was being spent on things that weren't needed, and therefore our needs were not met. And so when I went out on my own, I was just so focused on security and making sure my needs are met. And I was very fascinated by having money in the bank. I mean, even back then it was things like I loved having a full tank of gas, because that was a little type of a little savings account I could have right there in my car. And I read everything I could get my hands on of things like David Ramsey, really solidified in me not to get into personal debt. Now, of course, on the business side, we have tons of debt. Leverage is really what makes real estate investing so powerful, but very little personal debt. I loved reading Suze Orman. I would get all the Oprah magazines and read all of the articles that Suze would put out. Other people, I was very fascinated by things like credit score and savings, and reading about CDs and all sorts of financial products that were well beyond what was applicable to me at the time, like annuities. But I just had this pain. And I thought, how can I make sure that this pain doesn't happen to me? And so I was very interested in financial security early on. And then as I grew and had more financial security, then that evolved into a desire for a mindset around financial freedom.
So what is really interesting about that to me, Elaine, is there are so many examples of people, I think the vast majority of people, that grow up with financial insecurity and hardships. They don't convert that. They get stuck in this generational, multi-generational cycle of victimhood, poverty. And so what's really interesting to me, one of the things you just said that kind of stood out, if I heard you correctly, is that you started reading and you just became obsessed with. So what's interesting is you had all of this pain, this example of what not to do. But again, a lot of people will just carry on that legacy instead of rewriting the story. And so, yeah, maybe it was the books, maybe it was something where it was a little fuzzy but we're just, we're both very intrigued about that moment in time where you're like, I'm not doing that. And maybe for you, it was just seeing your parents, go through what they went through. I'm curious because, gosh, I mean, to go from that to I want to now be a doctor, and then we'll work through the transition of because you went to medical school for all those years,
right?
and then now you're full-time real estate investor. So I'd love to hear that of why you decided to become a doctor, and then we could talk about the transition into real estate.
So my journey so I knew early on that I wanted to go to college. That was a big part at 16 that I knew I needed to leave my family situation, was to really set myself up for a good trajectory in college. And it's so funny, the things that we don't know, right? And I'm able to look back at my past self with just this humor and grace and love for her. I remember being in my guidance counselor's office in high school, and the internet was around back then. I'm not that old. old, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. So there was these big books with all the colleges and universities in the country, and you would, flip through them, and it would show like, University of Pennsylvania, undergraduate and graduate. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do under anything. I just want to go straight to graduate school. And like, just speaking to like how little I knew about the process, but I had some sense that I needed to completely change what was happening in my life, as compared to the way I was raised. And so I went to college. I went to a small private school just right there in the county where I grew up. That was a nice stepping stone for me. I really became an adult there. I was really taken under the wing of many of my professors. It was a religiously affiliated school, so there were monks and priests everywhere that I developed relationships with that really helped me to get the parenting that I had been lacking through my teenage years. That really set a foundation for a successful adulthood. And then I actually went on and got a master's degree in health administration and policy, which is like an MBA, but for healthcare. And then I just had this, I'm just really fascinated with the human body. Even to this day, even though I'm not practicing medicine, I think a lot about physiology and how it interacts with mindset. Like I love that you started talking about the carnivore diet and how you have energy from that. Just thinking about how our bodies work, very fascinated with that. So I went to medical school. In between graduate school and medical school, I worked for a few years. That was pretty interesting. That's when I met my husband. Then I went to medical school. I trained as a psychiatrist, and that was such a pivotal decision for me because as I was deciding what specialty to choose in my residency training, you can basically lump the medical profession, in my mind, into three separate buckets. There's the internal medicine specialties, which are things like family medicine, pulmonology, nephrology, all of our major organ systems. Those folks generally prescribe medications. There's all of the surgical specialties. Obviously, they're in the OR. And I had this intuition that, hey, if I was going to spend all of this time, I mean, literally years of 80 hours per week on this training, I wanted to have something that was with me at all times. And I thought, well, as an internal medicine physician, unless I just have a pharmacy with me at all times, it's not like inside of me. And as a surgeon, well, I don't live in an operating room, so it's not with me at all times. But as a psychiatrist, you do learn pharmacology, you do learn how to prescribe, but you also learn therapy. And I thought, well, gosh, even if I'm not in the room with a patient where they're the patient and I'm the psychiatrist and I'm actively doing therapy with them, it's always in your mind. Once you have that skill set in your mind, it's like a lens that you can't take off. You can't unsee your understanding of humans and how our brains work and attachment and learning and growth, and then knowing the therapeutic skills to help people through their personal growth. And so that's why I chose psychiatry. And so even though today I don't practice psychiatry in the sense that I don't have patients, I don't prescribe, it's just such a part of me. I think as a psychiatrist all day with my investors, understanding the psychology of money, the psychology of security, of the visions that they have for their futures with this money, understanding how to lead my team. What do people want in their careers? What do people want in their daily work? Thinking about guiding a property management company, right? Home is such an integral decision of everyone's life. It's where we spend most of our time. How do we create healthy communities? How do we create healthy residents? And so I couldn't have predicted when I went into medicine that I would eventually, be a business owner and be applying the skills that I learned in medicine to the business world. But I think that helps you to see this like thread in my mindset through all of those years that makes the transition from practicing clinical medicine to running a business make more sense, specifically because of the specialty that I chose.
So yeah. And so how, I'd love to, why'd you make the transition, right? Because there's a lot of school. It had to be a difficult situation or a difficult decision for you to, after all of that school. And how long did you practice for?
I actually only practiced through my residency training.
Okay. But still, years and years. Years and years of schooling.
That's about 8 years.
Yeah. So why did you make that transition? What was the first transition? It wasn't directly into investing, was it?
It was. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So Nick and I got married. We turned my home into a rental. I was accepted to medical school just a few weeks later. It takes about a year before you actually start because, the admission process is so early.
In debt.
I started. Yep. I was taking out tons of debt, right? To go to medical school. We had an additional car. We sold the extra car to apply to my tuition, all sorts of things. And so I was in medical school, and we were investing in real estate. We bought one property while I was in medical school. So then we had two plus our personal home. And then when we moved for residency, we continued to invest, and it snowballed. This was during the years when the market was really accelerating, values were accelerating. We were able to do a BRRRR business model. So we buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. We've never sold a single asset. We just kept that equity snowball going. And we reached financial freedom while I was still in residency. And so in 2019, Nick left his technology career. He had been part of a tech startup when we were in Oklahoma City when I was in medical school. And then when we came to Rochester, Minnesota, where we live now, he did part of what's called the entrepreneur movement at the Mayo Clinic, where he basically created like a small tech startup inside of the Mayo Clinic. And we had reached financial freedom along the way. Nick had got his real estate license. We had built up a real estate sales team. We had a property management company all the way through. We had always managed our own assets. We've never had third-party management. So all these like stepping stones were falling into place, so to speak. And in 2019, Nick left tech to run our company full-time, and that really accelerated our growth. At that point, we had been working with passive investors for about a year or so, really accelerated that. We were making a lot of money from commissions. We were growing the property management company, and I was in medicine. And the intent was that I would practice medicine part-time for many, many, many years. I get a ton of joy out of working with people through the pain in their lives, helping them to retell their story to themselves, tell an empowering story, work through traumas, all of the things that you think of when you think of psychiatry. I loved that work. And then 2020 happened. And we had 3 young children. Our youngest child was born in April of 2020. This was like, it was uncertain if Nick could be in the delivery room. You remember those like few weeks when the country just was losing its mind around, how many people would this illness kill?
Yes.
And I was finishing residency in October of 2020. And the plan had been that we would take 3 months off. We'd go to New Zealand. We'd spend some time with the kids. And I'd start a new contract part-time at a hospital in January of 2021. But from the time my son was born until the time I finished residency, every day that phone would ring and one of my 3 children would have had a COVID exposure. And Minnesota was fairly strict. So once a child had an exposure, they couldn't go back to school for 10 days. Other children in the home, their 10-day period started when child 1 was on day 10. I mean, it was a disaster. We were scrambling for childcare left and right. I was canceling with my patients left and right, which is obviously a hardship in their lives as well. And I just realized over that summer that there was a lot of unnecessary suffering. I was suffering because I was being pulled in all these different directions. My patients were suffering because I was canceling, which is a pain for anyone, but particularly in a therapeutic relationship where a big part of that relationship is stability and consistency. Our business was suffering because who knows if Nick was going to be available that day or if he would need to be with the kids. And so I just had this like light bulb moment of, this was how I spoke to myself. I said, hey girl, you have worked so hard for financial freedom. And you have it. And there's a lot of suffering happening right now because you're all being pulled in these different directions. Just postpone your contract with the hospital. A vaccine will come out, kids will go back to school, life will get back to normal. But just enjoy your children. Don't worry about COVID exposures. You guys can work on the business from home. Just take like a sabbatical. And so it was never a decision of like, oh, today I don't practice medicine anymore. I quit. It was never anything like that. It was just, hey, I have this opportunity because we've worked so hard on building this real estate portfolio and I can take better care of my kids and not cancel on my patients. So I let the hospital know I wanted to postpone my contract for a year. The business just exploded. Once Nick and I were together full-time, shoulder to shoulder, rowing in the same direction, ideating together, building together. We launched a bunch of joint ventures, then we launched our private equity fund. I mean, it was just such a time of extreme growth. Everyone was so happy because we didn't have any demands on our time outside of ourselves. And so when that year came around and it was time to re-sign with the hospital, I tried to negotiate down to 1 day a week. and they weren't having it. And so I said, okay, this is just not going to work for me. Maybe it will at some point in the future. Maybe it's another year, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10, I don't know, but it's not right now. And then that's when I like officially made the decision that for the indefinite future, I wouldn't practice medicine. So that's how it all unfolded. And it again goes back to that original belief that when there's pain in your life, figure out how you can grow from it. Figure out, how is this serving me? How is this for me? How can I make something new or better out of this pain? I think without COVID, we would not have the business that we have today, because I probably wouldn't have come into the business until, 2030 or something like that.
So that was my next question, because in my mind, I was thinking you have been doing this for 15 years. Like that you got, but it sounds like, if I'm tracking correctly, that you actually didn't start this until 2020? Like real estate?
We started investing. No. We started investing in 2011.
2011. Okay.
So we had financial freedom from our own portfolio, probably around 2017 or so.
And how many did you have at that point? Sorry.
Probably about 35 single family homes.
So you have been, then that was just, you guys just, were you trying
Burring.
Burring. And so were you trying to do, like, did you have a goal? Were you trying to do 2 a year, 3 a year?
As many as we had money for. And we started like really figuring out that to churn our capital, we could get more and more. So we would work it out. We've always worked with local regional banks. We've always had fixed rate debt. We've never worked with like Wells Fargo or Bank of America or any of those big banks. It was always people that we knew. So we started working with people to say, hey, we want to do 10 homes this year. We want you to approve that much credit. And then we would buy in cash. It would take us about a month to do the renovation. We would place a resident, because these were commercial loans. We didn't have a seasoning period. So then we would get the appraisal done. We already had all the underwriting and everything done with the bank. They just needed to walk through, get the appraisal, make sure they liked our renovations, see the new lease. And then we could get our capital back out at, say, week like 10 or 12.
Wow.
So it was a machine. And we were just churning our capital as fast as we possibly could. And that's why then in 2019, Nick stepped away from tech, because we were running this huge operation of all of these renovations. Our first foray into working with passive investors we just paid a fixed 10% interest rate so that we had a bigger bucket of capital, and then we would just churn that as part of our BRRRR bucket. And then we eventually did joint ventures and private equity. But we've been building since 2011. We very much follow what many entrepreneurs do, is that hockey stick, right? And then in the beginning, it looks like not much is happening, but I kind of think of that as like, that's when your bread is in the oven.
Yep.
And it needs to spend that, right? If you take it out early, you don't have the product that you want. It just needs to be in there, even though it's not it doesn't feel as active. It doesn't feel as exciting. And then we hit that exponential growth when Nick got his license. We launched our property management company. Nick joined the company full-time in 2019. I joined the company full-time in 2020. And then that's what led to that straight up growth.
And at that point, you guys had, just from the residual, probably I'm assuming from the properties that you had thus far, the 30 properties, you had like you said, when you were having that conversation with yourself, you had a good nest egg where you didn't have to stress financially about stopping and launching this. So do you also, so you started really with like a property management company when you were investing obviously, but you started with property management, is that right?
Well, we owned the properties. We were managing them ourselves. And then it got to the time where we couldn't manage them ourselves alone. So we had to ask ourselves, do we hire a third-party property manager, or do we create a property management company to service our own properties?
Okay.
And we're just such big believers that operations is everything. Marketing, leasing, customer service, maintenance, all of those things. That's where the real value comes from in real estate, right? If a property is poorly managed, it can go down in value very, very quickly. And so we created our own property management company. There were several years that we did third-party property management for other folks. That's how we, went through that growth trajectory. But then eventually we said we will only manage what we own through either our joint ventures or our private equity fund. So today, of that 300 million, probably about 25 million of it is third party owned, and then the rest we own.
Wow. Okay. So I don't know if you mind sharing. It's okay if you don't. How many properties you own to date?
We have 1,300 doors.
1,300 doors. That is amazing.
Now, so is that's personally, or that's in the funds?
That's in our entire portfolio. So in that portfolio, It's about 300 million. About 85 million Nick and I own ourselves. About 25 million is third party owned. So we have no ownership stake in it. And then the rest is owned in either our joint ventures or our private equity funds, where we have a 50% ownership stake, and then our investors own the other 50%.
Got it. Okay.
That's amazing.
And so, I was having a conversation last week with Jonathan Campbell, who runs DLP Realty. He actually, Don just sold his real estate, Don Wenner, who owns DLP Capital. And how'd you meet Don, by the way?
I know Don through a mastermind.
Yeah. Okay. So I was talking to Jonathan. He actually purchased DLP Realty from Don this year in just a couple weeks ago. And I was asking him kind of the trajectory of what Don went through, because Don started, in real estate when he was in the early 20s. And he started buying, started investing in single family properties and flipping, holding, and bought a lot of properties. Then he had to go acquire, hard money. And it was a local attorney, and they did like 200, 300, 400 deals together. But Don said he realized at one point that the lender was making just as much money as he was, but he was doing, quote unquote, all of the work. And the light bulb went off, and he was like, wait a second, that's the pinnacle. Like why? And I say it's the pinnacle because there's a lot when you're managing other people's money. There's a lot that we don't do that yet. But that's when he shifted, right? And today I think he manages 300 or 400 million. No, sorry.
Yeah, he's
$3 3.5 billion, something.
Yeah,
in that.
Yeah, he's a B.
Yeah, he's a B. But that's when the light bulb went off for him. When did the light bulb go off for you guys? When you were like, you know what, we need to, or not need to, but we're going to, go in this direction of raising capital when did that happen?
Yeah, so that was when, in that period that I was just describing, where we had worked with the banks to basically pre-approve our lending so that we could churn the capital as quickly as possible. And one of the hardest parts about renovations is finding your handy people, finding your electrician, finding all of those relationships. And when you find a good one, you want to keep them busy, because if not, rightfully so, they go off and take other jobs. So then it became, wow, we have this really amazing team, right? You can kind of think of it as like we were assembling the tracks, and then we were assembling the train. And then we said, hey, we need to keep this train in motion, because every time we stop this train, it takes a lot of effort to stop it, and then it takes a lot of effort to start it up again. Let's just keep the train in motion and instead direct our efforts to keeping the train in motion. And so that was going on in our mindsets. And this was with our single family home portfolio, our BRRRR portfolio. And then at the same time, people were starting to see that our lives were changing, that our mindsets were changing, how we were spending our time. They were seeing the financial impacts that were happening in our lives. And so they started coming along and saying, we'd like to invest alongside you. So it all happened very organically. And when we first started working with passive investors, I had a lot of fear around that, as a lot of people do. And I think that's a very righteous fear, because it's a very sacred obligation to work with someone else's capital. And so the way that I kind of allowed myself to psychologically step into that was to do debt, was to say, no matter if this is a home run renovation, everything, all the stars align, it goes great, or if it's one of those tougher renovations where, you start taking some things apart and you realize the renovation needs to be more extensive than you had planned. No matter, we would pay our investors a fixed 10% interest rate. So that's how we started doing that. It was all just, family and friends, people we knew, and then word grew, and that's when we then eventually moved into our joint ventures and then our private equity funds. But that's how that all started.
That's amazing. So I have if it's okay, I'm gonna just this. I want to take this back for a second, because we were just having this conversation with some friends of ours, and they're probably going to watch this and know who I'm talking about. But you had mentioned earlier, and I wrote this question down and highlighted it because I think it is very interesting, because Clayton and I did the Dave Ramsey thing too. When we entered our marriage, and we were in a lot of debt to start, and we bought Total Money Makeover, went through that whole process, got out of debt, paid off our house, all the things. But then it was, I don't remember where the light bulb switch went off for us. Dave Ramsey is great, I think, when you're at a certain level, but at some point what we've learned is the people that do really, really well and operating on a much higher level, they are leveraging debt. Right. And so what was your light bulb moment for that? And like, if you're talking to somebody that's brand new, just getting started, and they want to be where you are today, eventually, right? Like,
well, not necessarily. Well, is that the question? Like, not necessarily where you are, because it's such a small percentage of people that are going to go out and raise capital. Right. I think what most people they're going to watch this, right? They're going to listen to you. They're going to be like, gosh, man, this young lady came from, like, I can relate to that. Yeah. Came from nothing. And
they want the financial security.
They want the financial security, right? Yeah, I think that's.
Yes, but also too, though, well, maybe they don't necessarily want to go into exactly what she's doing, but if for somebody that wants to get to a place of abundance and a wealthier state of living, you do have to flip the switch at a certain point, right? And so.
Yes.
What was that like for you? When did that happen? And what was your light bulb moment? If you, I'm assuming you had one.
There wasn't any like distinct like boom light bulb moment, but some of the things that come to mind are my parents had really struggled with debt. So, and it wasn't just the debt, but the debt made things worse. And, we know that people who are generally psychologically healthy don't use substances, right? Substances are to cover anxiety or pain or some other thing. And so there was this duality that as we got more and more into debt, the substance use increased, right? Because it was harder for my father to deal with, his daily life, to face the suffering. So our home was foreclosed on. I remember we were driving around. We would go, it must have been once a month, to the mall with paper checks. I was probably, 10, 11 years old, and go pay Sears and go pay JCPenney and go pay, all the places. And I just had this sense of like, this isn't right. And then I started seeing my parents doing things. Keep in mind, this was in the 90s, so it wasn't as like quick with digital money today. But, they're writing checks that they know the money's not actually there. They're hoping that it'll be cashed, 5, 6, 7 days later. And I just had this, like, I didn't exactly know, but I just had this sense of like, they seem really upset when they're talking about these things. This seems to cause a lot of pain, and, there's a lot of whispers, and we don't talk about this and that sort of thing. And then, so that was my feeling around debt. And I think that's why I was so attracted to Dave Ramsey. And I think, what I've learned to interpret today is that he's really good for your personal finances.
Yes.
But when you make the decision that you're a business, then you need to have a totally different set. To this day, we still practice a ton of the Dave Ramsey stuff in our personal lives around budgeting, debt, those sorts of things. In our business, obviously, we have a ton of debt. That's how we've grown so quickly. So I think that was my feeling, my negative feeling around personal debt. At the same time, I knew that I needed debt in order to break out of this cycle. I needed debt to go to college and then eventually to go to medical school. And so I saw those numbers increasing, and they bothered me, right? Like, don't get me wrong, like all people, when you have that, I have 6 figures of student loan debt, it upset me, but I also had some sense of this is what's necessary to, to break me out of this generational cycle and start my life anew. And then on the real estate side, 2 things happened that were just so pivotal for us. The first is we got married in 2011. And although we were both very fortunate that we owned our personal homes, my home had dropped in value. I had purchased it in 2008. So by 2011, it had lost a decent amount of its value. And I'll be honest, despite everything that I described about how we had these mentors that said, you guys need to do real estate, and this is the path to financial freedom, I had, like we all do, this limiting belief of, but not right now. But right now we just got married. But right now I'm 24 years old. But right now we're trying to have a baby. But right now I'm going to medical school. And so we listed that home. Nick was so upset, but we listed that home for sale. And he said, Elaine, why would we sell this home? It's right down the street from where we live. We already own it. It has a great mortgage. We know the maintenance history and all of those things. I said, well, real estate investing is for the future. But luckily, it had lost so much value that we couldn't sell it. It was to where we would have needed to bring like $40,000, which was our entire life savings, in order to close the gap between, the mortgage that I had on it and what we could have sold it for. And I remember Nick saying, do you think a resident can cause $40,000 of damage? And I'm like, probably not. Like, our alternate option here is not very good. And so that was the energy that we went into with real estate investing. And I share that story to say many things, but if you're in a committed relationship, it's often one partner is more excited than the other. Today, Nick and I are probably about equally excited, but it took time for us to align our mindsets. Everyone has hesitations. Everyone has fears. Everyone wants to say, but it's not for me. It's not for right now. It's not this deal, right? Some of it is just jumping in. Some of it is saying, yes, it is. Yes, I'll figure it out. The time to start is now. You know, it's not time in the market. It's not timing the market. It's time in the market. All of those things. So a beautiful family moved into that home. There was some cash flow. The mortgage was getting paid down, and I was seeing it grow in value. And so, you know, today that home has over $100,000 of equity. So not only have we climbed out of the negative equity, but we've made tens of thousands of dollars in cash flow, and then, you know, over 6 figures of equity. So that was happening. And then because we were investing at a time that we were able to burr so quickly, we were able to get all of our cash out of our properties fairly quickly. And it was just such an obvious thing to me that, presuming I could cash flow the property after the mortgage was placed, then I would have cash flow and a home that I had $0 in. So even like very, very, very worst case scenario, let's say my entire portfolio got foreclosed on. Well, I had $0 in it anyway because of the burr method. So once I was able to come to peace with the worst case scenario, well, that had no power over me. So then I was just, well, of course, so long as the property can cash flow after the mortgage and the maintenance and all of the expenses and the CapEx, all of that is accounted for, and you have $0 in it because you've done a burr to pull out all of the original capital. I guess maybe that was the aha moment. Well, then I was like, well, I want to get my hands on as many of these as I possibly can. And to this day, that's how we still build our portfolio. We've never sold a single asset. Even our very large apartment communities, we always do the burr business model. We're always thinking about, how can we get all of our capital out of this investment as quickly as possible so that we can continue to own it and get the benefits of cash flow, debt pay down, forced appreciation, market appreciation, and the tax benefits while having $0 in it.
Yeah, and reuse.
That's kind of the trajectory that made me very comfortable with debt.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
So how many companies do you own today, Elaine?
So our principal companies are Black Swan Real Estate, which is our holding company for our real estate assets. And then we have Black Swan Living, which is our property management company. And then we have many like sub companies inside of our property management company. Like we do our own maintenance, our own renovations, our own snow clearance, those sorts of things that service our properties.
How many doors?
But those are our,
how many doors are you managing?
1,300.
13. Okay, right. So you're not doing any outside property, just for your portfolio. You're only managing your.
We do continue to do third party management for our legacy customers.
Got it.
That started with us years ago. We've made a commitment to them that, hey, you worked with our business when we were babies, so we're committed to you as long as we have a property management company. But we don't do any new third party property management.
Okay. So you've got the so Black Swan Realty, you've got the property management, you have the Black Swan, is it Capital? What's your capital?
Black Swan Real Estate is the name of the entity in which we raise our capital.
Okay.
So really our two entities are Black Swan Real Estate and Black Swan Living. Everything is housed within those entities.
And you have a real estate company as well.
That's inside of the property management company. Yes. We have a real estate sales team.
Got it. So how, and I realize, it's you and your husband, but again, like you have three, you have 3 kids?
We have 4 now.
You have 4 kids. Okay. So you have 4 kids now.
Yeah.
And you have a life outside of businesses. How are you managing all of these? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you. How are you managing all of these businesses successfully?
Yeah, excellent question. So 2/3 of our portfolio is here in Rochester, Minnesota. A third of our portfolio is in Tacoma, Washington. So we have some geographic considerations to think about as well. We have 47 full-time employees here in Rochester. We have about 30 full-time employees in Tacoma. And then we have a remote team of our virtual assistants. We have 6 virtual assistants. On the home front, we also have a team. So we, in addition to our children being in full-time school, we have a full-time nanny, we have a chef, we have a housekeeper that comes 3 times a week, lawn, snow, all of the things, so that we're not spending our time at the home managing those sorts of things. And that frees us up to be together, be with our children, and be running our company. So, luckily this isn't our first business that we ran together. Nick had a career in tech startups. We had a car dealership for several years while I was in medical school. So we generally know how to grow and scale a company. In the beginning, you hire someone that's just like your right-hand person. You kind of wake up each morning and you say, this is the bucket of work that needs to be done. Who's best suited to do this? How can I train you to take things off of my plate? And then as you grow the company, you build structure. So then you build departments. The second hire should always be someone that reports to your first hire so that you can start to get out of day-to-day management, right? Then that frontline employee is reporting to your now manager instead of you having two people that are reporting up to you. So then we built the property management company. First we focused just on management, and then we're very, very big into vertical integration. So all along, we were either working with our own capital or working with investors directly. Nick got his real estate license, so he was serving as the agent for our transactions. We were managing our properties. And then as we scaled, we basically looked at our P&L and said, well, what are our largest expenses? And how can we eliminate third-party vendors so that we can increase our quality, increase our control over the process, minimize administrative overheads, and then minimize costs? So we brought in maintenance. Then we brought in facilities, which is unit turnovers and common area cleaning. Then we brought in minor landscaping, anything that doesn't require like a lift or a permit. So we'll do small trees, shrubs, those sorts of things. Then we brought in lawn and snow, and just continually looking at what are the things that are the largest places on our P&L. We're thinking about bringing in garbage removal. Much of that comes because we're so geographically constrained. So if we were spread out all over the country, this would be somewhat impossible. But because our portfolio is so geographically dense, we're able to build that maintenance team, the facilities team, the snow team, all of those things. And we really believe that vertical integration wins the day because it increases your control, increases your quality. We have clear, consistent expectations that we're able to set with our residents. And then particularly because of the way real estate is valued. Real estate is valued based on net operating income multiplied by a cap rate. So in our market, it's about a 5 cap, which is a 20x multiple. So for every dollar we're able to save in, say, snow removal, we charge under market rate, right? We try to save money at the asset level. We're not necessarily creating profit centers inside of the property management company. So that creates $20 of asset value because we have a higher net operating income because our expenses are lower. And then because of our split model, that allows us to get to our cash out refi faster for our investors, which hits that target of getting to an infinite rate of return as quickly as possible. And then it's a 50-50 split after that. So our investors make $10 and we make $10. So all of our incentives are very aligned to have this deep vertical integration. And that's really the phase that we've been in over the last several years, particularly in 2023, as interest rates went up and inventory went down. It was harder to grow our unit count. So instead, we really focused on deepening our vertical integration so that we could decrease our costs, which increases the value of our portfolio overall.
I love that.
That's amazing.
I love that. So time's limited because Elaine's got a hard stop.
Yep.
So Elaine, what's next? Like what's the vision? One of the things actually we learned from Don is he put together this legacy plan where I wrote him a check for it was $50,000 the first year and $50,000 the second year to be a part of his mastermind. And and he when he sat down with us for the first time, he said, "Okay, where do you want to be 100 years from now?" And I was like, with Jesus? Like, I was like, I'm not sure. And he said, no, you're missing the point. He said, what kind of an impact do you want to have on your children's children? And I never considered 100-year, right? And now that's what we build everything off of. Like what we're doing today is working towards that. So what's next for you guys as you look towards the next 10, 15, 100 years?
Yeah, I just love that you brought this up. I really think of visioning as my superpower. So every year in November, Nick and I lead a visioning workshop that we just put out for our community as a way to serve people. And then that people that want to continue that can then go on to coach with us in our Freedom and Legacy coaching program. I love the visioning exercise of 100 years after your death. So decide when you're going to die, push it out further than you think is possible because medical technology is advancing. So maybe it's 130 years. 100 years after that, what do you want your legacy to be? Because the common theme is you're no longer here to take action. So you have to have impacted people and organizations who can carry on your legacy for you. And from that perspective, you can then bring it back to say, well, then being in relationship with others is the most important thing I can do, because that's the only chance I have of having an impact 100 years after my death. So I really love that one. I also love the dance with my future self. So I always crack myself up that as a psychiatrist, I spend like all day talking to myself, and I encourage other people to spend all day talking to themselves.
I feel so much better now.
Absolutely. Everyone should have multiple relationships with your future self. And for some people that might be like, well, I don't know what that means, or that feels a little woo. You can have a relationship with the future self of this evening. What do you want your evening to look like? If you're transitioning from work to home, what do you want that energy to feel like? How do you want to spend time with your loved ones, with your children? Is there a self-care routine you want to go through? That's your future self. And if you're intentional about it, you will have a better evening than if you just leave the office, drive home, and then before you know it, you're in bed and you're like, man, I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm doom scrolling on my phone, and then the process repeats itself. You can have a future vision of yourself a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I love the period of about 3 to 5 years, because it's far enough out that you can have radical life change, but close enough that it feels tangible. A year is a little too close. So your mind will offer up to you, well, I can't get that done, or I already have things blocked, or that's not possible for me. But if you give yourself about 3 to 5 years, it allows your mind to say, maybe that's not going to happen this year, but I bet I could make it happen at, say, 2, 3, 4 years. And you open up this expansiveness in your mind, but it's also close enough in time that it doesn't feel unknowable, right? Like if you're looking at, say, 10 years, you're going to be a very different physical age. Maybe if you have children, they're out of the home. Like 10 years is like, well, I don't really know. Like for me, 10 years, my oldest child will be 18. That's totally different than 3 years when my oldest child will be 11. So that 3 to 5 year time frame for visioning is my favorite. That being said, right now, I personally am in a phase where I am thinking about 10 years. I've spent the last better part of the week with a group of girlfriends that I've been meeting with for years. We do a visioning retreat the first week of every January. And I've been writing out my 10-year vision, because right now I'm in a huge growth mode. After 2023, which was a slower year for a lot of folks, including my own company, as any entrepreneur, I'm like itchy of like, okay, what's next? Like, where are we going with this? How are we growing the portfolio? How are we growing the property management company? What are we doing in Tacoma? What are we doing in other markets? What are we doing with our coaching program? How are we impacting lives? And everything keeps coming back to impact. Like I keep coming back to, the impacts that we're able to have with our investors and the lives that we're able to change, the impact that we're able to have with our team members and the careers that we're able to create and the mindset education that we're able to give to people. I'm even thinking about like having mindset programs for our residents, and that if they participate in them, they get a certain rent credit. I can't force people to do something, but I can incentivize it.
That's amazing.
So everything is, for me right now, is like 10 years, I'll be almost 50 years old. Nick will be 50 years old. We'll be starting to transition into the phase where our children are young adults. The company will be very mature, very old. We'll have $1 billion of assets, and really asking like, what's the impact that we want? And of course there's, financial metrics attached to that. I'm running a business, but it really keeps coming back to, how do I help people use the power of real estate and financial freedom to leverage their mindset? Because once your mindset is in the right place, the money piece just finds itself. It just puts itself together. It's like it just takes on a little life of its own, and just bam, you just have it. In my coaching program, Freedom and Legacy Blueprint, it is not a real estate coaching program. And a lot of people are like, really? You're like the real estate expert. Like, why don't you coach on real estate? And I'm like, hey, I'm happy to talk about real estate. If it comes up in the setting of a coaching question or an application, absolutely. But I promise you, if you do this mindset work, all of the other stuff becomes easy. You see that that's just logistics and that it flows. And so I really focus on personal growth. And that's where I see myself going more in the next 10 years. So, kind of looping back to, where we started, like, have I left medicine? Well, I don't prescribe. I still have a license and all of those things, but I don't prescribe. but I still think like a psychiatrist every single day of moving people through their life story, helping them make sense of any trauma and pain, and then focusing on their future self and the constant walk toward the horizon, toward this attainment of our future self, and these multiple relationships that we can have with different versions of ourself in the future, and the relationship we can have with our past self, and loving them and giving them grace. And even if we're like, man, I'm a little embarrassed that you did that, that's okay. You did the best you could. You learned from it. You laugh with that younger version of yourself, and you say, thank you for getting me here. And then you know that who you are today is the past version of who you are in the future. And so you can come at yourself with this like lightness of, I'm doing the best I can. I'm learning and growing so that I can continue to do better and to do more. And I just keep that walk toward the horizon, towards my future self.
Yeah. That's
this is my favorite thing to talk about.
No,
That's
so
amazing.
well, and same here. And you know, you're where you are because you're who you are, right? And just the personal development that you've had to go through, and I know you need to bounce, Elaine, but the personal development that you've had to go through from the trauma when you were a kid to where you are today, and the continuum, like that's the stuff that excites us, is because I mean we know that for things to change we have to change, right? And so
that's right.
It is that mindset piece, Carol Dweck, right? Mindset. That mindset piece is what I really want people to walk away with today.
Yeah.
Because Elaine, if you can do it, and not necessarily, right? Like I'm not saying, and that's why I jumped in with the whole capital thing, because that's a whole nother level, right?
Sure.
But every time we interview a guest, we walk away and we're like, if she can do it, why can't we? If he can do it, why can't we?
That's right.
And it's all absolutely, and it's all up here. Right? It's all up here. So I'm so glad that you brought that around.
Yeah.
Elaine, I know you have a hard stop. I could talk to you. We joked before 100%. This. I could talk to you. You're awesome. Like you're.
They're
I
like,
didn't
how
know.
long do you want to go? I'm like, well, sometimes I run Zoom calls for 6 or 7 hours. I mean, should we order some lunch?
You're amazing. I didn't know what to. This is our first time meeting. I didn't quite know what to expect today, but you've inspired me. I know you've inspired Stephanie and everybody that's going to watch this.
Yep.
So thank you so much.
Honor.
Thank you so much. So this is the importance of getting in the room and being around people that, that are where you want to be. And that's the whole focus of what we're doing here at Proximity Podcast. So appreciate you. We'll see you next time.